Part 3. It must have been some imp of the perverse, or some sardonic pull from dark hidden sources, which made me change my plans as I did. I had long before resolved to limit my observations to architecture alone, and I was even then hurrying toward the square in an effort to get quick transportation out of this festering city of death and decay. But the sight of old Zadok Allen set up new currents in my mind, and made me slacken my pace uncertainly. I had been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends, and I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking with him. Yet the thought of this aged witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days of ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. After all, the strangest and maddest of myths are often merely symbols or allegories based upon truth, and old Zadok must have seen everything which went on around Innsmouth for the last 90 years. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution, and in my youthful egotism I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpouring I would probably extract with the aid of raw whiskey. I knew that I could not accost him then and there, for the firemen would surely notice and object. Instead, I reflected, I would prepare by getting some bootleg liquor at a place where the grocery boy had told me it was plentiful. Then I would loaf near the fire station in apparent casualness, and fall in with old Zadok after he had started on one of his frequent rambles. The youth had said that he was very restless, seldom sitting around the station for more than an hour or two at a time. A quart bottle of whiskey was easily, though not cheaply, obtained in the rear of a dingy variety store just off the square in Elliott Street. The dirty-looking fellow who waited on me had a touch of the staring Innsmouth look, but was quite civil in his way, being perhaps used to the custom of such convivial strangers, truckmen, gold buyers, and the like, as were occasionally in town. Re-entering the square, I saw that luck was with me, for, shuffling out of Payne Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Zadok Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle wistfully after me as I turned into Waite Street, on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. I was steering my course by the map the grocery boy had prepared, and was aiming for the wholly abandoned stretch of southern waterfront which I had previously visited. The only people in sight there had been the fishermen on the distant breakwater, and by going a few squares south I could get beyond the range of these, finding a pair of seats on some abandoned wharf, and being free to question old Zadok, unobserved, for an indefinite time. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy, "Hey, mister," behind me, and I presently allowed the old man to catch up, and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged tongue did not loosen as quickly as I had expected. At length, I saw a grass-grown opening toward the sea between crumbling brick walls, with the weedy length of an earth and masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss-covered stones near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. Here, I thought, was the ideal place for a long, secret colloquy, so I guided my companion down the lane and picked out spots to sit in among the mossy stones. The air of death and desertion was ghoulish, and the smell of fish almost insufferable, but I was resolved to let nothing deter me. About 4 hours remained for conversation if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, and I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler, meanwhile eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's vinous garrulousness to pass into a stupor. After an hour, his furtive taciturnity showed signs of disappearing, but much to my disappointment, he still sidetracked my questions about Innsmouth and its shadow-haunted past. He would babble of current topics, revealing a wide acquaintance with newspapers and a great tendency to philosophize in a sententious village fashion. Toward the end of the second hour I feared my quart of whiskey would not be enough to produce results, and was wondering whether I had better leave old Zadok and go back for more. Just then, however, chance made the opening which my questions had been unable to make, and the wheezing ancient's rambling took a turn that caused me to lean forward and listen alertly. My back was toward the fishy-smelling sea, but he was facing it, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef, then showing plainly and almost fascinatingly above the waves. The sight seemed to displease him, for he began a series of weak curses which ended in a confidential whisper and a knowing leer. He bent toward me, took hold of my coat lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. "There's where it all began, that cursed place of all wickedness, where the deep water starts, gate o' hell, sheer drop down to a bottom no soundin' like you can tetch. Old Cap'n Obed done it, him that found about more was good for him in the South Sea Islands. Everybody was in a bad way them days, trade falling off, mills losing business, even the new ones, and the best of our menfolks killed to privateering in the War of 1812, or lost with the Elizy brig and the Ranger scow, both on 'em Gilman venters. Obed Marsh, he had 3 ships afloat, Brigantine Columby, Brig Hefty, and Bark Symmetry Queen. He was the only one as kep 'em on with the East Indian Pacific trade, though Esdras Martin's barkentine Malay bride made a venture as late as 28. Never was nobody like Cap'n Obed. Old limbs of Satan. I can mind him a-tellin' about furrin parts, and callin' all the folks stupid for going to Christian meetin' and bearin' their burdens meek and lowly. Says they'd orter get better gods, like some of the folks in the Injies, gods as 'ud bring 'em good fishin' in return for their sacrifices, and 'ud really answer folks' prayers. Matt Elliot, his first mate, talked a lot too, only he was again folks doing any heathen things. Told about an island east of Otaheite, where they was a lot of stone ruins older'n anybody knew anything about, kind of like them on Ponape in the Carolines, but with carvings of faces that looked like the big statues on Easter Island. There was a little volcanic island near there too, where they was other ruins with different carving, ruins all wore away like they'd been under the sea once, and with pictures of awful monsters all over 'em. Well, sir, Matt, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch, and sported bracelets and armlets and head rings made out of a queer kind of gold and covered with pictures of monsters, just like the ones carved over the ruins on the little island. Sort of fish-like frogs or frog-like fishes that was drawn in all kinds of positions, like they was human beings. Nobody could get out of them where they got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty even when they very next island had lean pickings. Matt, he got to wondering too, and so did Captain Obed. Obed, he notices, besides, that lots of handsome young folks would drop out of sight for good from year to year, and that they want many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the folks look danged queer even for Kanakies. It took Obed to get the truth out of them heathen. I don't know how he done it, but he begun by trading for the gold-like things they wore, asked 'em where they came from, and if they could get more, and finally wormed a story out of the old chief, Wallachia, they called him. Nobody but Obed had ever believed the old yellow devil, but the captain could read folks like they was books. Nobody never believes me now when I tell 'em, and I don't suppose you will, young feller. Though come to look at ye, you've got to get them sharp reading eyes like Obed had. The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere portentousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy.
Well, sir, Obed he larnt that they's things on this earth as most folks never heard about, and wouldn't believe if they did hear. It seems these Canakies was sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god things that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favor in return. They met the things on the little island with the queer ruins, and it seems them awful pictures of frog fish monsters were supposed to be pictures of these things. Maybe they was kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from there. Seemed they was some of the things alive in the stone buildings when the island came up sudden to the surface. That's how the Canakies got wind they was down there. Made sign talk as soon as they got over being scared, and pieced up a bargain afore long. Them things liked human sacrifices, had had 'em ages afore, and lost track of the upper world after a time. What they done to victims, it ain't for me to say, and I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right with the heathens, because they'd be having a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give a certain number of young folks to the sea things twice every year. Maeve and Halloween, regular as could be. Also give some a carved knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They drove 'em in all from over the sea, and a few gold-like things now and then. Well, as I says, the natives met the things on the little volcanic island, going there in canoes with the sacrifices, etc., and bringing back any of the gold-like jewels as was coming to 'em. At first, the things didn't ever go onto the main island, but arter a time they come to want to. Seems they hankered arter mixing with the folks, and having joint ceremonies on the big days, May Eve and Halloween. You see, they was able to live both in and out the water, what they call amphibians, I guess. The Canakies told 'em as how folks from the other islands might want to wipe it out if they got wind of their being there, but they says they don't care much, because they could wipe out the whole brood of humans if they was willing to bother. That is, any as didn't be certain things, saying such as was used once by the old ones, whoever they was, but not wanting to bother. They lay low when anybody visited the island. When it come to mating with them toad-looking fishes, the Canakies kind of balked, but finally they learned something as put a new face on the matter. Seems that human folks has got a kind of relation to such water beasts, that everything alive came out of the water once, and only needs a little change to go back again. Them things told the Canakies that if they mixed bloods, there'd be children as'd look human at first, but later turn more and more like the things, till finally they'd take to the water, and gin the main lot of things down her. And this is the important part, young feller. Them as turned into fish things and went into the water wouldn't never die. Them things never died, 'cept they was killed violent. Well, sir, it seems by the time Obed knowed them islanders, they was all full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and begun to show it, they was kept hid until they felt like taking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more attached than others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water, but mostly they turned out just the way them things said. Them as was born more like the things changed early, but them as was nearly human sometimes stayed on the island till they was past 70, though they'd usually go down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had took the water generally came back a good deal to visit, So's a man 'ud often be a talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather, who left the dry land a couple of 100 years or so afore. Everybody got out of the idea of dying, 'cept in canoe wars with the other islanders, or as sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snake bite or plague or sharp galloping ailments or something, afore they could take to the water, but simply looked for to a kind of change that wasn't a bit horrible art in a while. They thought what they'd got as well was all they'd have to give up, and I guess Obed kind of come to think the same himself when he chewed over old Wallacheia's story a bit. Wallachia, though, was one of the few as hadn't got none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royal lines on other islands. Wallachia, he showed Obed a lot of rites and incantations as had to do with the sea things, and let him see some of the folks in the village as had changed a lot from human shape. Somehow or other, though, he never would let him see one of the regular things from right out of the water. In the end, he gave him a funny kind of thingamajig made out of lead or something, that he said it'd bring up the fish things from any place in the water where there might be a nest of 'em. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayers and such. Wallachia allowed as the things was scattered all over the world, so's anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring 'em up if they was wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed should keep away from the island, but the captain was sharp for a gain, and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of them. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of the gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery in Waite's old run-down fullin' mill. He didn't dast sell the pieces like they was, for folks would be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews would get a piece and dispose of it now and then, even though they was swore to keep quiet. And he let his women's folk wear some of the pieces as was more human-like than most. Well, come about 38, when I was 7-year-old, Obed, he found the island, people all wiped out between voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on, and it took matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had, after all. Them old magic signs, as the sea thing says, was the only things they was afeard of. No telling what any of them canakies will chance to get a hold of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older than the deluge. Pious cusses these was. They didn't leave nothing standing on either the main island or the little volcanic islet, except what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. In some places there was little stones strewed about, like charms, with something on 'em like what you call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old ones' signs. Folks all wiped out, no trace of no gold-like things, and none of the nearby catechies would breathe a word about the matter. Wouldn't even admit there'd ever been any people on that island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth too, because in seafaring days what profited the master of a ship generally profited the crew proportionate. Most of the folks around the town took the hard times kind of sheep-like and resigned, but they was in bad shape because the fishing was petering out and the mills wasn't doing none too well. Then's the time Obed he begun a cursing at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven as didn't help 'em none. He told 'em he'd know the folks as prayed to gods that give 'em something you really need, and says if a good bunch of men 'd stand by him, he could maybe get a hold of certain powers as 'd bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Oh, course, them as sarved on the Summitry Queen and seed the island knows what he meant, and wasn't none too anxious to get close to see things like they'd heard tell on, but them as didn't know what 'twas all about got kind of swayed by what Obed had to say, and begun to ask him what he could do to set him on the way to the faith as it bring him results.
Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder, and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within it a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangeness of Innsmouth, and elaborated by an imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any real substantial foundation, but none the less, the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in references to strange jewels clearly akin to the malign tiara I had seen at Newburyport. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island, and possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself, rather than of his antique topper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the noise of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, then beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself. I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair proportion of them.
Poor Matt. Matt, he always was against it, trying to line up the folks on his side. Had long talks with the preachers. No use. They run the Congregational parson out of town, and the Methodist fella quit. Never did see Resolve Babcock, the Baptist parson. Again, wrath of Jehovah. I was a mighty little critter, but I heard what I heard and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashtoreth, Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines, Babylonish abominations, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin.
He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to a stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness, and snapped out of some more obscure phrases.
Don't believe me, eh? And just tell me, young feller, why Captain Obed and 20 other folks used to row out in Devil Reef in the dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the winds was right. Tell me that, eh? And tell me why Obed was always dropping heavy things down into the deep water the other side of the reef, where the bottom shoots down like a cliff lower'n you can sound. Tell me what he done with that funny-shaped laid thingamajig as Wallachia give him. Hey, boy, and what did they howl on May Eve, and again the next Halloween? And why'd the new church persons, fellers as used as sailors, wear them queer robes and cover their shelves with them gold-like things Obed brung, eh?
The watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he began to cackle evilly.
Beginning to see, eh? Maybe you'd like to have been me in them days, when I seed things at night out to sea from the cupola top of my house. Oh, I can tell you little pictures of big ears, and I won't missin' nothing o' what was gossip about Cabin Obed and the folks out to the reef. How about the night I took my pa's ship's glass up to the cupola and seed the reef a bristling thick with shapes that dove off quick soon's the moon riz? Obed and the folks was in a dory, but them shapes dove off the far side into the deep water and never come up. How do you like to be a little shaver alone up in a cupola a-watching shapes as wasn't human shapes, eh?
The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth.
S'pose one night he seed something heavy heaving off in Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learned next day a young feller was missing from home, eh? Did anybody ever see hide or hair from Hiram Gilman again? Did they? And Nick Pierce and Lully White and Adoniram Southwick and Henry Garrison, eh? Shapes talking sign language with their hands. Them as had real hands. Well, sir, that was the time Obed begun to get on his feet again. Folks see his 3 daughters a wearing gold like things as nobody never seen on 'em before, and smoke started coming out of the refinery chimney. Other folks was prospering too. Fish begun to swarm into the harbour, fit to kill, and heaven knows what size cargoes we begun to ship out to Newbury ports, Arkham, and Boston. 'Twas then Obed got the old branch railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the catch and come up in sloops, but they was all lost. Nobody never seen 'em again. And just then our folk organised the esoteric order at Dagon and bought Massasoit Hall, often cavalry commandery for it. Met Elliot was a mason and again the selling, but he dropped out of sight just then. Remember, I ain't saying Obed was set on having things just like they was at the Kankakee Isle. I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixing, nor raise no young'uns to take to the water and turn into fishes with eternal life. He wanted them gold things, and was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Comin' in '46, the town done some looking and thinking for itself. Too many folks missing, too much wild preaching at meeting of a Sunday, too much talk about that reef. I guess I done a bit by telling Selectman Maury what I see from the cupola. There was a party one night as followed Obed's crowd about to the reef, and I heard shots betwixt the dories. Next day, Obed and 32 others was in a gaol, and everybody a-wondering just what was afoot and just what charge agin them and could get to halt. God, if anybody looked ahead. A couple of weeks later, when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long.
Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of that tide, for at high water the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again I strained to catch his whispers.
That awful night, I seed 'em. I was up in the cupola. Hordes of 'em, swarms of 'em, all over the reef and swimming up the harbor into the Monuxet. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night? They rattled our door, but Pa wouldn't open. Then he clomb out the kitchen window with his musket to find Selectman Maury and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screams, shouting in Old Square and Town Square and New Church Green, gall throat open, proclamation, treason. Called it the plague when folks came in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them as a gin in with Obed and them things, or else keep quiet. Never heard of my Pa no more.
The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened.
Everything cleaned up in the morning, but they was traces. Obed, he kinder take charge and says things is going to be changed. Others will worship with us at meeting time, and certain houses he's got to entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they done with the Kanakys, and he for one didn't feel bound to stop 'em. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says they brung us fish and treasure, and should have what they hankered after. Nothing was to be different on the outset. Only we was to keep shy of strangers if we knowed what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on they was second and third oaths that some of us took. Them as had help special would get special rewards, gold and such. No use balking, for they was millions of 'em down there. They'd rather not start rising and whipping out mankind, but if they was gave away any of us to, they could do a lot toward just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut 'em off like folks in the South Sea did, and them Kanakees would never give away their secrets. yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as might bear tales outside, that is, without they got prying, all in the band of the faithful order at Dagon. And the children should never die, but go back to the Mother Hydra and Father Dagon, what we all come from once. La la Cthulhu Fatagan, Finglui Maglana Fa Cthulhu Relie Waganagal Fataga.
Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul. To what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain. He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard.
God, what I sinks! I was 15-year-old. Mene, tekel, ufarsin. The folks as was missing, and them as killed theirselves. Them as told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all called crazy, like you're calling me right now. But God, what I seen! They'd have killed me long ago for what I know. Only I took the first and second oaths of Dagon off an Obed. So I was protected, unless in a jury of 'em proved I told things knowing and deliberate. But I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It got worse around Civil War time, when children born since 46 begun to grow up. Some of 'em, that is. I was afeard. Never did no prying after that awful night. Never seen one of them close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to the war, and if I'd had any guts or sense, I'd have never come back, but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things wasn't so bad. That, I suppose, was because government draftmen was in town after 63. After the war, it was just as bad again. People begun to fall off. Mills and shops shut down. Shipping stopped and the harbor choked up. Railroad give up. But they never stopped swimming in and out the river from that cursed reef of Satan. And more attic windows got aboard up. And more noises was heard in houses as one's supposed to have nobody in 'em. Folks outside have their stories about us. Suppose you's heard plenty of 'em, seeing what questions he asked. Stories about things they see now and then, and about that queer jewelry as still come in from somewheres and quite all melted up. But nothing never gets definite. Nobody'll believe nothing. They call them gold-like things pirate loot, and allow the Innsmouth folk is furrin blood or is distempered or something. Beside, them that lives here show off as many strangers as they can, and encourage the rest not to get very curious, especially around night time. Beasts balk at the critters, horses whistle mules, but when they got autos, that was all right. In 46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town never see. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them, as he called in. Had 3 children by her. 2's disappeared young, but one gal has looked like anybody else and is educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham feller as didn't suspect nothing. Well, nobody outside'll have nothing to do with Innsmouth folks now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Onesiphorus, his eldest son. But his mother was another of them that wasn't never been seen outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shed his eyes no more and is all out of shape. They say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells before they go down for good. Ain't been seed about in public for nigh on 10 year. Don't know how his poor wife can feel. She come from Ipswich. And they nigh lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50-odd year ago. Obed, he died in 78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children dead, and the rest, God knows.
The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew surer, seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech.
"Hey, you! Why don't you say something? How'd you like to be living in a town like this, with everything a-rotting and dying and boarded up monsters crawling and bleating and barking and hopping around black cellars and attics every way you turn, eh? How'd you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches and order a Dagon Hall and know what's going on part of the howling? How do you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmas, eh? Think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you, that ain't the worst."
Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I care to own.
"Curse ye! Don't sit there staring at me with them eyes. I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and he's got to stay there. In hell, I says. Can't get me. I ain't done nothing or told nobody nothing." "Oh, you young feller. Well, even if I hadn't told nobody nothing yet, I'm a-going to now. You just sit still and listen to me, boy. This is what I never told nobody. I says I didn't get to do prying out of that night, but I found things about just the same. You want to know what the real horror is, eh? Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils has done, but what they're going to do. They're a-bringing things up out of where they come from into the town. Been doing it for years, and slacking up lately. Them houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Streets is full of 'em. Them devils and what they brung, and what they get ready. I say, when they get ready. Ever hear tell of Shoggoth? Hey, d'ye hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen 'em one night.
The hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the malodorous sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently, his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper.
"Get out of here. Get out of here. They seen us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know now. Run for it, quick, out of this town."
Another heavy wave dashed against the loosing masonry of the bygone wharf, and changed the mad ancient's whisper to another inhuman and blood-curdling scream.
"Yeah, yeah!"
Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there. And when I reached Water Street and looked along it toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen.